From your vantage point as a military analyst, how would you summarize the current state of the front line across the Lyman, Mirnograd, Siversk, Pokrovsk, and Kupiansk axis? And what are the dominant tactical patterns you are observing? I mean, tempo of attacks, penetration attempts, and defense in depth.
Well, from the military point of view, the situation in Kupiansk is only a little bit better than it was around June or July this year, which means that Ukrainian armed forces have recovered much of the western side of the town, but not the center. Russians are still holding out in the center. In Lyman, the Russians are on advance. In Mirnograd, Russians have reported 2 mornings earlier that all the organized resistance by Ukrainian troops has ceased. This means that an entire battalion of the 38th Naval Infantry Brigade of the Ukrainian Armed Forces has been destroyed over there or has surrendered. Further south, we have a situation in Pokrovsk. That was Pokrovsk also. Pokrovsk is lost for Ukraine. Ukrainians are holding out on in the fields north of the town. Arguably, thanks to UAVs, they are doing quite well in destroying most of additional Russian attempts to assault in bigger groups. And in Zaporozhye, the Russians have crossed the river east of Hulaipole and have entered the town in 2 directions. They're actually holding the southern part of the town and trying to penetrate further west, which means they are actually having the local garrison, or what was that of this garrison, almost encircled from three sides. So this is also not a very positive situation. What is worse, the Ukrainian Glavkom, General Siversk, has successfully destroyed most of Ukrainian armed forces, splintered all the brigades down to perhaps 4 or 5 into battalions or even companies, strewn around the entire battlefield. Personnel losses of Ukrainian armed forces in the last 2 months are particularly heavy, not only to combat but also to defections. I don't see very positive situation for Ukraine right now. On the contrary, Ukrainian armed forces are also exposed through the actions of Siversk and through the orders by President Zelensky to the full firepower of the Russian armed forces. Therefore, they cannot build a coherent front line. They can only try to hold specific selected points along the front line and then try to stem down the Russian infiltration. But they are lacking troops, they are lacking reserves, they are lacking even ammunition and supplies, not to talk about replacement vehicles, replacement armament. So the situation is actually really bad. On the Russian side, Russians are exhausted and tired when one talks with them. There is no doubt about this. The Russians are, they are fed up of this war, actually. Even the people who are still volunteering to serve, they're primarily doing that because of getting paid. And the Ukrainian state is having ever bigger problems with finding the money necessary to pay them, to pay the volunteers. Therefore, the number of those volunteering to serve is constantly decreasing, which in turn is resulting in a situation where the Russian armed forces have also major problem with finding enough reserves to continue the assault. But they are still having enough to run local assaults, local infiltrations. And therefore, from Putin's point of view, everything is fine. It doesn't matter how many get killed, because the majority of them are neither from Moscow nor from St. Petersburg, the 2 cities that kind of are the only that matter in Russia. Nobody asks the rest of Russians what do they think. And therefore, he can continue. Whether the economy is going to collapse or not, well, perhaps it's going to happen, perhaps not, we are going to see. But the point is, in the current situation, Putin has the situation perfectly under control. He has control over the media, he has control over the public. He has built up, or is still building up, the Rosguardia to protect himself from the Russian armed forces or from any kind of possible coup attempts within Russia. He is in control of the narrative worldwide, except in the West. Although even in the West, in large parts of the public are also slowly turning tired of the war and therefore asking ever louder questions which remind of those asked by Putin. So the situation is not the least positive, whether on strategic, on operational, or at tactical level. As for what weapons are dictated, essentially you have vast superiority of the Russian optical cable guided drones, which are causing heavy casualties to Ukrainian armed forces, forcing them to disperse. To this dispersion, small groups of Russian infantry have it easy to infiltrate deep into Ukrainian through the Ukrainian front line up to 10-15 kilometers in some places. We have seen this in where was it, Sako and Vanseti 3 or 4 days ago, where there was another group that went some 10 kilometers or even 15 kilometers behind the Ukrainian lines. Fortunately, that attack was poorly organized. There was no significant follow-up, so the Ukrainians have managed to stop it. But this is a typical situation on the front lines nowadays.
If I understood you correctly, the main question is who will be exhausted earlier?
I don't think this is really a question because, excuse me, regardless what Ukrainian government does, or actually Russian government does, its economy and its pool of potential combatants are much bigger, stronger, more resilient than Ukrainian. So the direction of the war is actually quite one-sided right now, and this is against Ukraine. Correspondingly, one needs not being surprised at all of these peace negotiations, which are actually run by Western presidents and chancellors alone, without any kind of involvement of Putin, except via Trump, heading exactly nowhere. This is like you are sitting with your friend on some beach and talking about what are you going to pay this evening for in the restaurant. You don't know before you go to the restaurant, check the menu, and then actually order and pay for that. This is the situation in this regards now. So it's entirely pointless discussing peace if there is no interest for any kind of peace from on Putin's side, first and foremost.
Yeah. And actually, what indicators would you watch to assess whether Russian operations are aimed at limited gains, tempo pressure, or a broader strategic objective? And how might Ukrainian counteroffensive options evolve in response?
Okay, I'll start from the rear. Ukraine has no options for a counteroffensive. Even this in Kupiansk was a local counterattack possible because Drapati is clever enough to organize his available units in a fashion that is effective, while Ukrainian commanders in other sectors are obviously either incompetent or unable to do so for other reasons. As for Russian objectives, they're always clear. They are fighting all out, short of deploying nuclear weapons, which means they are fighting in all possible by all possible means and by all possible and available means, from propaganda warfare in the West, from propaganda warfare at home, via deploying their heaviest conventional weaponry against Ukraine down to this infantry assault supported by a mass of UAVs. And their outcome is not minimalistic or not maximalistic, but it is definitely clear. This is actually a destruction of Ukraine as a state. Whether this now might result in something like complete destruction of Ukraine and capitulation of Kiev, Russians marching into Kiev, whatever, or just a partial solution, it doesn't matter. But what matters to them is to win this war, and Putin is hell bent on winning this war, no matter what it costs, no matter in complete disregard for the future of Russia as a state, as a federation, as an economy, as a military power. It doesn't matter what. And this is why it is particularly absurd to then watch and monitor Western president chancellors, and not to talk about Ukrainian government and parliament, obviously trying to continue considering this some sort of a traffic accident that now needs to be sorted out through negotiations or some other semi-measures or semi-solutions which are known, freezing the war, whatever, just to end it, because this is better than continuing to lose it. This is all that comes to my mind in this regards.
Okay, got it. The air domain remains pivotal. How would you evaluate the relative effectiveness of Russia's air campaign versus Ukraine air defense and integrated air power in shaping battlefield outcomes along these fronts?
Well, the Russian Air Force might have had bad times in 22, 23, even in 24, but it has adapted, it has adjusted its means and tactics, and it has learned its lessons. It has managed to force the heavy, long-range Ukrainian surface-to-air missile systems away from the front line. And foremost, this air power is not operating alone in a vacuum. Some sort of air power is going to win the war alone, but it is operating in good cooperation with ground forces and with UAV forces. So nowadays we see combined attacks on Ukraine by Guarantee attack UAVs and Su-34s, for example. We see that Su-34s are always escorted by Su-35s. So if any Ukrainian interceptor ventures anywhere nearby, it is shot down, like we have seen just, what was that, 2 or 3 weeks ago, when a Su-27 was shot down, Ukrainian Su-27, and a lieutenant colonel of Ukrainian Air Force was killed. Russian Air Force in grand total was capable of running much more complex operations than the West thinks, perhaps even than the Ukrainians think. It has introduced a number of extremely simple, almost primitive, but still precise enough guided weaponry with very long range, 70 to 120 kilometers. It is striking targets it wants to target, and unless Ukrainian electronic countermeasures are effective, like they are from time to time, or time and again, Russian air power is playing a very important role in this war. Meanwhile, why? Because it is striking not only Ukrainian logistics system in the rear, which means depots in Lviv, in similar places in Western Ukraine, but also the railway knots behind the front line. It is striking also depots 50 to 70 kilometers behind the front line, or those closer to the front line, whether in Kramatorsk or in Zaporozhia or in Dnipro. We have seen all of this last few weeks. We have on days in particular, we have seen the Russians striking almost at will whatever they want to target in Odessa, in the Odessa area, and closer to the front line. Both Russian fighter bombers using glide bombs and Guarantee UAVs and other types of long-range UAVs are also striking targets almost at will. So this is another absurd development in Ukraine of the last 1.5 years, that there were lots of announcements about deliveries of air defense weaponry, but all that was delivered was far too little, but to bolster the air defenses. It was merely enough to, from time to time, improve the air defenses of specific areas. But the grand total, nevertheless, surprisingly enough, to say it sarcastically, Ukraine has proven unable to defend even its power grid. Meanwhile, there is not a single power plant in Ukraine that hasn't been hit so far, whether by cruise missiles or by attack UAVs. Most of substations have been damaged at one point or the other. The government has completely failed to fortify the substations and of the power grid over the last year, or to improve their fortification. So what was fortified before that, okay, and what was not fortified ever since remains unfortified and was largely destroyed meanwhile. So again, Russian air power remains highly influential. This is correct. And this is going to remain that way because Ukraine lacks means to counter it over sufficient range, which would mean with missiles with range of more than 200 kilometers. And the West has simply nothing or very little of that kind in service. And what it has, it's keeping for itself, for its own defense.
I would like you to expand your thought in terms of Ukrainian air defense. And my question is, what is your assessment of Ukraine's air defense architecture? I mean, multi-layered missiles, radars, and interceptor systems. And obviously the key bottlenecks or strength that influence its ability to protect critical urban and industrial hubs while enabling counteroffensive operations?
Well, in theory, Ukrainian air defense system is very good, well organized, and it is providing layered defenses. That means you have long-range SAMs, you have medium-range SAMs, you have short-range air defense systems. Theoretically perfect. In practice, it's not working because you don't have the missiles, or at least not enough missiles for what is going on almost every single night over Ukraine, which means that the Russians are outmaneuvering and overpowering this system by sheer numbers. When they launch or stream 500 UAVs in the same night into Ukraine, it takes Ukrainian air defenses so long and so many means to intercept the majority of these air defenses that then Russians have it easy to combine such strikes around the time the UAVs reach their target zones with ballistic missile attacks and cruise missile attacks. And then it regularly happens that the Ukrainian air defense system is overpowered due to the lack of missiles, due to the lack of reloads. Also for the reason that actually 1/3 of this air defense system meanwhile consists of helicopters trying to intercept and shut down the UAVs, attack UAVs, of F-16s and Mirages doing the same. So your principal means of air defense are busy just hunting the UAVs, these 500 plus UAVs which are entering your airspace every night. And then you have far too few SAMs to defend yourself against the rest. And then you regularly, even if it is just 10 or 20 attack UAVs plus or other missiles which are actually hitting their targets, you regularly receive severe blows, and ever more of the power system is damaged or disabled or really durably destroyed. And in grand total, the air defense system is not working because of sheer numbers deployed by the Russians, and there is no major improvement in this regards in sight.
I got you. What lessons do you see for coalition support? I mean, training, intelligence sharing, missile and air defense provisions from the current operational picture, and how should external partners calibrate expected timelines and risk to avoid overpromising or under-delivering?
The principal problem both in Ukraine and in the West is lack of strategy. There's not one statesman who could say, okay, I have an approximate idea how to defeat Russia. No, they're all trying to help Ukraine not lose, but Russia shouldn't lose either, because if Russia loses, then, oh gosh, who knows what happens over there. Therefore, we want to avoid a situation where Russia is losing, but Ukraine shouldn't lose either. This is the principal problem. What we need is statesmen or statesmen who say, okay, let's defeat Russia. Let's find a way to defeat Russia. Let's develop the ideas in this regards. Once you have such ideas, you can start building up the industry and say, okay, we need long-range weaponry, we need interceptor drones, we need means to intercept incoming Russian missiles, whatever type. So that means air defenses are first. Secondly, we need capability, industrial capability to rearm the Ukrainian armed forces, not only our own armed forces. We need to invest into this, not just borrow money to buy ourselves a little bit obsolete weaponry for our own defense, which is what is currently happening in the West, but actually invest into future technologies in order to obtain an entirely new quality of war fighting capability. There is no trace of this anywhere in the West. There is a little bit in the United States, a trace or two in the UK. But for example, in Germany, there is nothing of that. In France, there is nothing of that. In Poland, a little bit, but not really, and so on and so on. And Ukraine is then trying to patch with whatever it's, sorry for expression, incompetent and corrupt system of governance, almost the government is permitting to happen. Ukrainian people, as people, everyday people, are very resilient, very innovative, very capable. They could do a lot of things. What is preventing them from achieving this is their government plus their parliament, which apparently thinks that its role is to say yes, president, and that's it. So we are talking about strategies first. Nobody over there has a strategy. Because nobody has a strategy, the armed forces have no clear idea how to develop themselves. That is in the West. And in Ukraine, the armed forces are fighting. Well, this is not even the Soviet style, but this is more like, I don't know how to describe it actually. This is, there is no tomorrow. Basically, let's waste our troops to hold the Russians in this, so we can claim that we are still holding Pokrovsk, even if we have lost it already 1.5 months ago. And therefore, let's offer our president the opportunity to celebrate major propaganda victories. This is how the Ukrainian armed forces are fighting. So therefore, you don't have solutions. And because you don't have solutions, you cannot really focus on developing countermeasures, developing arms industry, mobilizing your population, entire population, not just a part of it, and investing properly into defeating Russians. So you are fighting for survival, you as Ukrainians, and the West is not interested in offering you more, but in enabling you to continue surviving. It's not enabling you to defeat Russia. So there is no solution inside because of this, and because there is no solution inside, there is no planning, there is no industrial development, and there are no results on the battlefield. On top of this, because of this entire situation, we have a situation with the Ukrainian armed forces which are urgently in need of reforms, which is something I'm talking about for 1.5, 2 years. Even more importantly, your own officers are demanding this. Members of parliament are demanding reform of the armed forces, removal of an incompetent Glavcom, retraining of troops, retraining of NCOs, retraining of officers, reorganization of brigades, and so on. Nothing is happening in this regard. On the contrary, the situation is getting ever poorer. Nowadays, you have a Glavcom who is, whatever recruits or mobilized troops are still left, is concentrating all of them into his assault troops. These are 5 or 6 assault regiments, which are then spent like there's no tomorrow. Who cares if hundreds of people get killed? It's fine. We can claim another propaganda victory. Zelensky can take selfies in front of the entrance to Kupiansk, and that is victory. You can't win any kind of war with this kind of strategy, whatever somebody thinks about that.
Don't you think that you underestimate our development because we are still not occupied by Russia, and actually this big war, I mean the full scale invasion, has lasted for almost 4 years, and we are still alive?
The fact that you are still alive is not something that your president or your Glavcom can pride themselves with, but what plenty of your troops on the battlefield, you can thank to them. You can really go to every single soldier that is still fighting in Ukraine, shake his hand and beg for his forgiveness. And thank him also that you are still alive, that Ukraine still stands, because they are those who are decisive in these regards. So the fact that the Russians are incompetent and so stupid as to rush themselves into sort of or convert their entire armed forces into some sort of kamikaze mechanized formations or whatever you want to call them, doesn't mean that Ukraine is doing it right. It just means that the Russians are stupid as to do such things, which in turn means that if properly organized, if properly mobilized, if properly invested, if properly trained, if properly led and commanded, Ukraine could actually win this war. But instead of winning this war, it's losing it. And it's doing so because its president and its Glavcom are doing, and plus, of course, all of their supporters, immediate supporters, buddies, friends, whatever you want to call them, immediate aides, are doing their utmost to support this idea about propaganda warfare that they are fighting, instead of fighting a serious war. So it is not a miracle or something else, but combination of Russian incompetence and steadfastness of your trigger pullers, your troops on the ground. Why Ukraine is still around. But it doesn't mean this is going to remain that way. On the contrary, the pace of Russian advance is, despite the exhaustion of the Russian armed forces, is increasing. The pace of defections from Ukrainian armed forces is increasing. The number of losses on Ukrainian side is also increasing, as much as the figures are for Russian casualties, especially for those killed, are increasing as well. So you have multiple factors, all of which are indicating, yes, losses are ever heavier, both sides are ever more exhausted, and it looks like a draw or as a standstill, but actually Ukraine is losing ever faster this war. Even just because one of your, or currently it is two sectors, are temporarily holding out. It doesn't mean that you are winning the war or you are going to survive in similar fashion for another year. Right now, the assessments are quite on the contrary of that.
Yeah,
So
but at the same,
one shouldn't fall for. One can, of course, indulge himself into oh, everything is fine, everything is nice. We have damaged a Russian submarine, we have destroyed the MiG-31, and think that this is now going to win the war. It is not going to win you the war, because this war is decided on the battlefield, not in Novorossiysk and not in Moscow. Sorry.
Don't you think that one of the pivotal factors is that we don't get enough aid from our Western partners, because we still don't have long-range missiles, for instance?
Of course, it is one of the factors, but it is not the principal factors, because the problem is this: even if you would get long-range missiles from the West in next 5 minutes, your own armed forces, your intelligence services, two intelligence services, GUR or HUR and SBU, plus your border guards, wouldn't know how to deploy them properly. And why don't they know how to deploy them properly? Because each of these four, you have four services deploying long-range UAVs and missiles, plus Air Force. This is five services, different services of armed forces and intelligence services. And each of them is fighting its own long-range campaign against Russia. One is targeting refineries, the other is targeting military targets, the other is targeting the Black Sea Fleet, the other is targeting the Russian air defenses, and so on and so on. And there is absolutely no coordination between them. And why is there no coordination? Because the top chieftains of these services, each has its own scheme, each is acting along own scheme, which is making him richer the more he strikes specific targets in Russia. So you have actually a corruption system even there. What a surprise, it's not working. And where what was it, 2 or 3 months ago, you had queues in front of petrol stations in Russia. Now, months later, there are no queues anymore. Why? Because the Russians adopted. Why did they adopt? Because they have had enough time to introduce countermeasures against Ukrainian strikes and to find alternative solutions for buying themselves fuels. So why is this possible? Because there was no sustained campaign against the Russian oil industry. And why is that so? Because there was no strategy behind the operation, and because there are five different branches of the armed forces and intelligence services, each of which is doing something else. Therefore, you need organization in this. You need somebody at the top saying, okay, enough is enough. All of this long-range weaponry comes under one control, one command and control system. And this command and control system needs people who knows what to target in Russia in order to damage Russian economy to let's say to sufficient degree, or even disable it completely. But if you're targeting entirely different kind of targets every second week, or even within shorter periods of time, not to talk about longer periods of time, then you're achieving nothing in grand total. You are just achieving propaganda victories for Zelensky, nothing else.
Don't you think that these strikes, they worn out refineries, they worn out system of Russia in general, not only oil industry, but the military industrial complex, and etc. I understand that you say that it is not enough yet, but maybe in future.
Maybe. Right now it is not enough. And it is not going to be enough, let's say, in the next 2 or 3 months. That's the problem. And it would have been enough if there would be a system behind what the general staff doing, what is SBU doing, what is GRU doing, what are border guards doing, what is the Air Force doing. But there is no system. Or if there is a system, then what is the Air Force doing? Because the Air Force is mostly operating against targets immediately behind the front line or at the front line, like nowadays control centers for Russian UAVs or UAV teams. So they are targeting them. Why? Because somebody at the front line said, listen, in the building so-and-so coordinates this and this. There is a Russian UAV team guiding UAVs at our position. Okay, the Air Force loads bombs, sends a MiG-29 or SU-27 or even an F-16. This flies the strike, hits the building, destroys it, and the Russian UAV team is killed or disabled or whatever. So this is the only part that is working. The rest is working literally so that, for example, commander of the border guard says, okay, I get paid more if my long-range UAVs destroy this factory in Russia. Therefore, we are going to strike this factory in Russia. Commander of the SBU says, okay, I'm paid better if I strike this and that factory in Russia. Therefore, we are striking this and that factory in Russia. There are other such factories in Russia somewhere else. You understand what is the problem? So you have the same with GRU or HUR. You have the same with general staff. Somebody is paying the generals to strike the specific targets, but nobody comes to the idea to say, hey, hello, let's sit together and discuss this. Where are our economists? What can they tell us about the Russian economy? How can we disable this economy? Therefore, you strike targets, you cause fire and smoke, whatever it is. Everybody is celebrating, but there is no effect of this because you have hit who knows what. Nobody knows what have you hit. It looks fantastic because there is fire and smoke on the video, but whether there is lasting damage, nobody knows. Whether or actually, what one knows is that there is no restrike of the same target to increase the damage or to hamper repairs. There is no restrike, to keep this installation, for example, a refinery, out of operations for even longer periods of time, and so on and so on. Nothing is happening in this regards because there is no organization behind this. There is just corruption. Sorry for expression. So again, even if the West is guilty and shamefully guilty for not supplying with enough long-range weaponry, no doubt about this. But even if it will give you this long-range weaponry you want to have, your commanders would misuse this weaponry for their own purposes, to strike targets for which they are paid to strike instead of targets which are making sense to strike, and then to restrike them again. That is the problem.
And actually, could you summarize and could you count 1, 2, 3, 4 manual how to overcome this lack of unity and lack of management?
That is plain easy. Either President Zelensky quits on his own, or he reorganizes his government from Yermak's bodies to a government of national unity. That is the first step. He has to accept that he does not know everything better than everybody else in Ukraine. Currently, he is behaving like he knows everything better than anybody else. Well, actually, most of the times he's just delegating and then not checking what is going on, what has happened. If I have a business with 20 employees and I tell them, okay, guys, manufacture books tomorrow, or print them, or write books, and then do not check what are they doing the next year or longer, then I need not be being surprised if nothing happens, because this is what Zelensky does. So second problem is he's either himself corrupt or at least looking away from corruption. We have seen this in the case of Yermak, both of these, indications of both of these. So I'm not sure, but it is one of the two, nothing else. Either he is intentionally ignoring corruption at the top, or he is looking away intentionally. Or he is involved in this corruption. So this is the second problem. That means you need people who control your president 24/7, who are constantly after him and checking what is he ordering and what is done in these regards, and what is he doing in order to ascertain that his decisions are also being realized, because this is currently not happening. So theoretically, this is the job of your parliament, but your parliament is more interested in singing the national anthem and ignoring problems than actually doing something to solve the problems. So this is, you cannot expect anything to happen from this point of view. Then you need a national, you're facing a war of extermination. Ukraine is facing complete destruction. Russians are not attacking Ukraine with some kind of semi-solutions in their mind, but with the ultimate solutions in their mind, which is destruction of Ukraine. Therefore, you need a general mobilization. All your able-bodied men need to go serving either in the armed forces or in the industry, and the same is valid for your women. If you are treating this like some sort of, well, the same way the West is treating it, which means, oh, well, the Russians have attacked Ukraine, but well, this is not really our problem. But we are going to help Ukraine not lose. I mean, then you don't need to expect that the results are corresponding, which is Ukraine is still standing after 4 years. It hasn't lost, but it's never going to win. That is the next problem. So you need stopping all of these semi-solutions, general mobilization, to introduce general mobilizations in order to make your people equal also. Because you have a deep rift in the society between the rich, who can buy themselves out of going to the front lines, and the poor who cannot afford running away from Ukraine, not to talk about buying themselves out of the military service. Then you need... You have to fire Siversk. There is no way around him because, excuse me for expression, but he's really a military incompetent. He's fighting for nothing else but to produce good news for Zelensky. And this is not his task. His task is to command the armed forces, to reorganize them constantly, constantly reorganize them, constantly reform them, constantly improve them. Because you have constantly to improve them in order to adapt to the new developments on the front line. He's doing nothing in this regards. He's still fighting the way he fought, and he lost Bakhmut in early 23. And he's learning no lessons from this. Therefore, he is wrong in place. Several of his buddies need to follow. Whether you put them under investigation or put them or assemble them to some sort of demining system or whatever, or unit, whatever, this is left to you. But this is what you've asked me, what shall you do? You need a commander who is effective, who is really reforming the armed forces, who is really retraining them, reorganizing them, who is not ripping apart every single brigade that he only can. One battalion in Zaporozhye, another battalion in Lyman, third battalion in somewhere north of Pokrovsk, and so on. This is absolutely insane. You have, right now, you have perhaps 4 or 5 intact brigades. And the net result of such a behavior for 2.5 years by Siversk now is that not one of your brigades, or actually, let's say, except for 4 or 5 brigades, the rest of brigades of the ZSU, of the Ukrainian armed forces, are all down to 30% of what they should be. They have 30% of their troops, or less. They have 30% of armored vehicles, tanks, infantry fighting vehicles, and so on. They have 30% of other equipment, UAVs, mortars, machine guns, and so on, which means your units are chronically under-equipped, understaffed, unable to hold their sectors of frontline. And it is not surprised that a single small Russian infiltration is regularly bringing an entire sector of frontline to collapse.
Yeah, in terms of your response, I have to say that, as you know, during the full-scale invasion and during the martial law, it's possible to change commanders, but it's impossible to change president and Verkhovna Rada, our parliament. I mean, because it is.
I know about this, but president can still quit on his own, or he can be clever enough to say, okay, I'm now going to fire all of my government ministers and sit down together with opposition and with my political party and pick up the clever people who are not corrupt, who are not linked to some kind of oligarchy or whatever, or some kind of private or commercial interests. There are such people in Ukraine, as surprising as this might sound, clever enough to pick them to bring them into government and to do the best for the country. But right now he's doing nothing except, I know the best.
Okay, let's get back to military stuff. For Kiev and Moscow, what are the most plausible near-term strategic objectives tied to these fronts, and what signals would indicate a shift toward de-escalation, heightened deterrence, or renewed escalation?
Let's start with Moscow. There is nothing of that because the de-escalation. Why? Putin is doing well. His system is perfectly solid. He's in power. He's guaranteed to remain in power. He's highly influential in the United States. He's highly influential in multiple countries of the European Union. He needs not stopping. And the armed forces, okay, they're attracting less or cannot even afford anymore enough mobics to mobilize or to volunteers for the armed service in Ukraine. But they are still enough to keep Ukraine under pressure and to make at least incremental advances. And the pace of these advances is lately increasing because of the weakness of the Ukrainian armed forces. So Russia and some kind of whatever you want to call it, holding back or something of that kind is not going to happen. I don't see this happening anytime soon. Even if the Russian economy would collapse tomorrow in the morning, they will continue. They would find a way to credit themselves by borrowing money abroad, by exporting their oil at even cheaper prices than they're already doing the same with gas and so on. So this is not a problem for the Russians, at least not for Putin. And for Ukraine needs, especially in military regards, needs a reform of its armed forces. It needs a new commander, new Glavcom, new general staff. Lots of Ukrainian brigades need new commanders as well, and so on. And then you can hope to, within 9 to 12 months, rebuild your armed forces, retrain them so that to improve their overall efficiency. This is what you need, and that urgently. Had you listened to, what is the name, Biletsky, for example, last year in October or November, you could have done this by now. You didn't. Okay, excuse me, not you, but Siversk didn't listen to him. So you still have, or actually now you have even poorer armed forces than you had 1 year ago, because you have lost lots of skilled commanders, you have lost lots of skilled troops, and are replacing them with ever poorer trained troops. So what you actually need is not some kind of trying to diminish the intensity of combat. This is not going to happen because the Russians are not going to stop, not going to lessen their pressure upon Ukraine, but you need the reorganization, retraining in order to improve your efficiency. Then you need to do the same with the Ministry of Defense, which is absolutely this is, I don't know how better to express it, but through specific words which are not advisable for use on TV, for example. Ministry of Defense is ineffective, let's say this way. So you need new decision makers in the Ministry of Defense, people who are not corrupt, who are not going to be corrupt, and who are constantly under public control in order to prevent them from becoming corrupt. So that you bring in the best innovations and apply these innovations in your armed forces. Right now you have one company which is monopolizing the supply of UAVs. And if people are not cooperating with this company, then they are punished. In some cases, even their units are disbanded as punishment for their disobedience or refusal.
If I understood you correctly, under the current circumstances, in your opinion, Ukraine will be defeated.
Yes. I'm telling this for 1.5 years, and this is what is happening.
Okay, the last question. Beyond the immediate battlefield, how do you assess the impact of these frontline dynamics on civilian infrastructure, humanitarian needs, and regional stability? And what should Western partners prioritize to sustain not only military resilience, but also civilian protection and reconstruction?
Well, the situation in Ukraine is meanwhile so bad that somebody in the West could come to the idea to say, okay, listen, Zelensky, or whoever you are leading from Kiev, we are now going to condition continuous or even increased provision of arms and ammunition on you dismissing Siversk and all the other incompetent and corrupt officers in the general staff. And only then are you going to get our weaponry. So this is the point number one. The West is supplying too little, but even what is the West supplying is poorly used because of Siversk and bodies. That is the point number one. Point number two. Essentially, Ukraine, let's say, east of the line connecting Kharkiv with Dnipro and Zaporizhia is already now a wasteland. It is completely destroyed. The Russians are currently considering shall they or shouldn't they go for Sumy, for Poltava and similar places. Depending on that decision, we are going to see this in the coming months. They are going to refocus or remain focused on what they are focusing now. We are going to see this. Right now, the answer is not certain. I am sure that they are going to approach Zaporizhia, the city of Zaporizhia, because they are just 14 kilometers outside of it. There are foremost troops. So they are going to reach Zaporizhia in a matter of 1 or 2 months. Dnipro is going to follow. Then the Russians know that they cannot assault such huge cities without suffering really losses which they cannot survive, which would prevent them from continuing the war. So they are probably not going to try investing these cities on their own, but they are going to surround them, isolate them, and bomb them and terrorize them like they are already terrorizing Kherson. Probably Kharkiv is going to follow in this fashion. In between, you have the Kramatorsk-Sloviansk agglomeration, where the infrastructure is already largely destroyed, and the destruction of that infrastructure is going to continue, which means that additional people, civilians, I don't know exactly how many are left in these areas, in Kharkiv, in Sloviansk, Kramatorsk, in Dnipro, and Zaporozhia, are going to flee their homes. Probably we are talking about at least 1 million, if not 2 or 3 million people. And this part of Ukraine is going to be savaged, just like everything east of it. Where I'm including also Donbass, that means Donetsk and Luhansk, what was held by the Russians already since 2014, because I don't know if you know it, but meanwhile, it is so that when you talk with people from there, they are the first to admit it, 80 to 90% of the local economy has been destroyed by the Russians. It's not there anymore. The companies have been closed. And the machinery, whatever there was, large part of machinery was taken to Russia or is left to root where it is, but nobody is using it. So even since they have been absorbed, officially at least, according to Russian law, according to Putin's decrees, they have been absorbed into Russia. Nothing has changed in this regard. There is no economic life over there, which means that really from Rostov to Kharkiv and to Zaporozhia, Ukraine is dead. It is mined, it is full of unexploded ordnance, it is full of destroyed mines, factories, airports, whatever you want, and of course destroyed towns and cities. There is nothing over there on which you can have organized life. Cities, the Russians are priding themselves a lot with the reconstruction of Mariupol, but they have restored perhaps 2 districts of the city. Rest remains destroyed, and this is the most recovered city in eastern Ukraine since the war, since the start of the all-out invasion. So the West could now say, okay, we need some kind of Marshall Plan for Ukraine, but that would mean also, don't forget about this, that Ukraine would have to give up a lot of its sovereignty, just like the receivers of the Marshall Plan in Europe after 1950, they have also given up a lot of their sovereignty. This is not going to happen because everybody knows if somebody in Ukraine comes to the idea to give up any part of sovereignty, of the country's sovereignty, he's going to end head shorter, whether politically or physically. So besides of that, in addition to that, for somebody to come to such an idea, to organize such a Marshall Plan for Ukraine, you first need an end of the war. You need durable peace, which you are not going to have, especially not if you just freeze the conflict, like currently is negotiated. You might hope to get some kind of guarantees from the West for safety, for Ukrainian safety from Russia, but this is what nothing, as we have seen this, the guarantees from 1990, what was it, 1994, 1996, sorry, it's escaping me now, and so on and so on. So everything that is happening right now are only half measures, some kind of general announcements, blah blah, public relation stuff, nothing really useful, no solutions. That is the problem. You need solutions. You need defeat of Russia, so that you force Russia out of Ukraine, or at least back to Donbas. You need to, because without forcing the Russians back, you cannot have peace. Without peace, you cannot have reconstruction of Ukraine. Demining, which is going to be an incredible task. You can expect after the war, whichever way this ends, there's going to be a industrial branch is going to emerge, gravitating just around demining and removing unexploded ordnance in Ukraine, because we have 200-kilometer stretches, deep stretches of the country full of unexploded ammunition and mines. This is going to take decades to remove, and so on and so on. So whatever you ask me now about what West needs to do, are such kind of decisions that they are not even anywhere in the view, not even in the minds of the decision makers in the West. So it is pointless to discuss them, excuse me for expression. Not that I'm avoiding your question. I could go on for hours explaining what is all necessary, but it's never going to work, because it's not going to happen. And it's not going to happen for exactly the same set of reasons for which Ukraine is supplied not enough arms, ammunition, and other aid to win this war, but only enough not to lose it. Because there is no decision making which would be ready to go to such extensions. That's why.
Tom, I have heard from you today gloomy forecast for Ukraine, but I believe that it will not come true. But anyway, thank you for your time, and goodbye.
Goodbye. Thank you very much for your time.